Well, hello, welcome back. It's me, Steffi. Um, we're continuing to read Ruth Schwartz, Soul on Earth, A Guide to Living and Loving Your Human Life. We're starting now with section 1, the why and how of personal transformation. And today we're going to read chapter 1. Mama. Okay, chapter 1, how our consciousness is changing and why it must. When faced with a radical crisis, when the old way of being in the world, of interacting with each other and the realm of nature doesn't work anymore, when survival is threatened by seemingly insurmountable problems, an individual life form or a species will either die or become extinct, or rise above the limitation of its condition through an evolutionary leap. That's from Eckhart Tolle. Wow. This is a great time to do this, Ruth. Holy moly. During our time on planet Earth, human beings have proven ourselves to be a smart, resourceful, and creative species. Yet our emotional and spiritual development has lagged far behind our intellectual and technological prowess. Over 2,000 years have passed since Jesus told us to love our neighbors and enemies as ourselves. And as a group, we've made little headway. In fact, we seem to have added ourselves to the list of those we struggle to love. Ooh. In fact, we seem to have added ourselves to the list of those we struggle to love. This way of being and its myriad ramifications have brought us to the crisis point to which Toll refers. Holy crap, Ruth. This was written ahead of your time. Both as individuals and as societies, we have repeatedly done terrible things to ourselves, each other, and the earth. As Toll points out in A New Earth, if the history of humanity were the history of a single individual, that person would be diagnosed criminally insane. Oh. And since this insanity has recurred, albeit in different forms, in every human time, place, and culture, it's safe to say it won't end without a major shift in consciousness. Now, many inner and outer signs indicate that we may be on the brink of that shift. As economies falter, climate change grows more extreme, and our individual lives offer up their endless array of challenges. Many of us are finding that our old ways of being are no longer available, effective, or sustainable. Crisis is a difficult but effective portal to transformation. When systems and beliefs we had relied on fail us, we feel disoriented, angry, or terrified. Yet, at the same time, increasing numbers of people are accessing deep levels of consciousness, wisdom, and healing. These are the conditions that can prepare us for an evolutionary leap. If we are to avoid destroying ourselves and the planet, we must shift from a consciousness of separation into a profound awareness of our connection to all of life. Yet, although many of us intellectually understand the importance of this shift, it continues to elude us. To understand why this change in consciousness is both possible and difficult, we must look at the way human consciousness is currently configured, how that affects us, and what possibilities it offers for us for transformation. It offers us for transformation. The objective reality is that, like all other species on Earth, human beings are part of a vast, interconnected web of support. Life works constantly and synergistically on our behalf, aiding us in a myriad seen and unseen ways. each second of our existence is made possible by vast numbers of other life forms and supports other life forms in return. Even the bodies we think of as our own provide homes for billions of mitochondria and bacteria, and in turn, these living organisms help keep us metabolically balanced. Every one of us is able to live the lives we live because of the past and present labor of millions of other people, as well as thousands of products created or extracted from animals, planets, earth, and sea. So why do we often feel isolated, lost, or disconnected? We have this experience. We experience this illusion because of the individuated structures of our consciousness, the psychic apparatus through which we perceive ourselves and our world. Albert Einstein explained it this way: a human being is part of the whole, yet experiences himself, his thoughts, feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, wow, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Wow, that was all from Einstein. Here, there. Depending on how we look at it, individuated consciousness is a blessing or a curse, a devastating punishment, or an amazing opportunity, because we experience ourselves as separate from others, from life. We suffer and cause harm. Yet because we experience ourselves as separate from others and from life, we also have the ability, in fact, the mandate, to make individual choices. Wow. Used wisely, this process of choice making can eradicate our suffering. Mind blown. What? This process of choice making can eradicate our suffering. Wow. If you include our thoughts and our words, as well as our actions, each of us makes thousands of choices each day. And with every one of those choices, we either align ourselves more fully with the energies of love and compassion, or energize within ourselves the forces of fear, separation, and hatred. Oh, is this starting to sound a bit like the Star Wars? Star Wars, not the Star Wars. There's a good reason for that. The Star Wars movies, like so many of the tales we tell as a species, center on this archetypal conflict and opportunity. The battle between light and dark is so often dramatized on our screens, is also alive within each one of us in each moment. If we could viscerally feel the truth of our connection to other human beings, other species, and the earth, we would automatically think, act, and speak with love and compassion. If we experienced everyone and everything around us as part of self rather than as other, and if we had not been warped in ways that turned us against ourselves, then adherence to the golden rule, treating ourselves as we wish to be treated, would not be a lofty goal, but an obvious and logical way to live. After all, when you have a blister on your foot, your hands automatically make themselves available to tend to it, because both feet and hands know themselves to be part of the same body. Ooh. Yet this palpable experience of oneness remains difficult for human beings to access due to the optical delusion Einstein described. Since we do not constantly feel that connection, few of us regularly affirm it with our choices. Sorry about that. We will probably get interrupted again because, as you know, I'm very popular. Just kidding. Um, maybe I don't know. Anyway, so whether true or apocryphal, Ruth, apocryphal, an unattributed story recently circulated on Facebook offers a great example of what human life might look like if we freed ourselves from the prison of individuated consciousness. An anthropologist proposed a game to the kids in an African tribe. He put a basket full of fruit near a tree and told the kids that whoever got there first would get to eat the fruit. When he told them to run, they all took each other's hands and ran together, then sat together enjoying their treats. When he asked them why they had run like that rather than competing for the fruits so that one of them could eat them all, they said, I'm going to say this wrong, Ubuntu. How can one of us be happy if all the others are sad? Wow. Even within our current consciousness, most of us have briefly tasted the joy of this kind of connection. When we fall in love, we often experience such an upwelling of generosity that we genuinely care as much for our lover's well-being as for our own. Inevitably, however, our love object disappoints us, and the walls of separation crash back down. Becoming a parent may affect us similarly. In fact, many people long to have children in order to be lifted beyond the confines of the narrow, separate self. Yet the thinning of the boundary of self that can occur between parents and children, or in some cases between other family, tribe, or group members, usually remains highly specific. Social psychologists call this phenomenon parochial altruism. Rather than helping us to connect more deeply to all other things and beings, our devotion to any specific us often leads us to define some other group even more firmly as other, not us. And whatever or whomever we identify as not us becomes a potential enemy. As human consciousness has grown more complex, we have fractured internally, increasingly leading us to experiencing an us and a not us, even inside ourselves. Most human suffering is caused by these patterns of disconnection, all of which are based on the illusion that we are wholly separate from one another. Caught in this illusion, we cannot possibly see life accurately. We form damaging, distorted beliefs, and these beliefs in turn create an energetic matrix within us and around us, a kind of magnetic field which determines what we are able to see and experience. Because of this, whatever we believe appears to us to be proven true. Because of this, whatever we believe appears to us to be proven true. Wow. There are so many ways to understand how and why this occurs. The psychological term projective identification describes one part of this phenomenon, explaining that we unconsciously act in ways that ensure that those around us will behave as we expect them to. Neuroscientists have found that our brains are programmed to register and amplify only stimuli that supports what we already believe. Wow. While failing to perceive or record evidence to the contrary. Our habitual thoughts actually carve psychological tracks in our brains, predisposing us to continue to think and experience life along those tracks. Wow. Neurological research also indicates that the oldest component of our brain, often called the reptilian brain, is specifically designed to keep us from harm by responding to potential threats while ignoring all other input. In the words of psychologist Robert Weitz, this hypersensitivity to threat amounts to what I call the imprisonment of the mind, a state in which the mind is primed to perceive threat and is continually assaulted by and frozen in the past and cannot conceive of a self that is free of physical and emotional pain. Aww. Wow. Our brain have access to different perceptions. Our individuated consciousness often leads us to identify with this primitive response rather than override it. As a result, many of us live much of our lives in defensive or offensive postures, alternately or simultaneously judging and fighting against ourselves, others, God, or life. This is a bleak way to live. It leads to despair, depression, and anxiety, which we as a species now frequently medicate with myriad legal and illegal substances and addictive behaviors. Wow. These addictions and compulsions further separate us from ourselves and each other, causing even greater suffering. Our suffering and alienation produce suicide, homicide, and every imaginable form of oppression and abuse, which we perpetuate against ourselves, those we experience as other, and even those whom we believe we love. And yet there is an entirely different option available to us as species, not only available, but in fact, increasingly accessible. All of this devastation stems from a single basic error in perception. Error in perception. The delusion that leads us to perceive ourselves as separate from one another and from life. As we correct this error in perception and begin to viscerally experience the truth of our connection to one another and to all other life forms, everything changes. Well, that's it right there. We become able to live in joy rather than despair, and to care for ourselves, each other, other species, and the planet in ways that both reflect and deepen our sense of connection and love. The very same individuated consciousness that has nearly destroyed us as a species also offers each one of us a way out, or rather a way in to a more accurate understanding of who and what we really are. All of us have the opportunity to choose this shift in perception, moment by moment, thought by thought, action by action, in every sphere and aspect of our lives. This shift in consciousness is not enlightenment in the traditional sense. It doesn't require us to catapult completely and permanent out of identification with our individual human selves. It's more like that neo-enlightenment teacher it's more like what neo-enlightenment teacher Craig Hamilton calls integral enlightenment or integral enlightenment. Integral, I like that better. A state in which we retain our identity as individuals, yet also consciously connect and identify with the larger aspects of ourselves. Rather than giving up our human personalities and merging into the all, we become able to experience the individual self as a sphere of influence, a tool or vessel. We can live both within and beyond. Because we viscerally feel our connection to each other and to life, we need never suffer from a sense of isolation and separation. Yet, because we still experience ourselves as individuals, we can continue to make our own unique contributions to the unfolding of human consciousness. This consciousness shift is not merely a cognitive process, because the intellect is only a small part of who and what we are. Intellectual understanding alone does very little to change our lives. So intellect does little to change our lives. We are complex, multifaceted beings made up of many layers of energetic, emotional, and somatic experience. Each of us contains strata of personal, familial, ancestral, and collective wounding, marbled through us like minerals through the rock. In order to make deep change possible, we have to heal, clear, or release that residue of trauma. Life is synergetic. As we heal, it becomes easier for us to connect with our higher consciousness. And it becomes easier for us to connect with higher consciousness. And as we connect more fully with higher consciousness, we become more able to heal. In the process, we build transformational momentum, not only for ourselves, but for our species. Each instance of personal healing carves new pathways in the collective field of human consciousness, making it easier for others to access the same shift. Life on the earth plane, life in a physical body, will always be challenging. My inner teachers tell me that from the soul's perspective, life is actually designed to be challenging. These challenges offer us vast numbers of choices and creative opportunities, each of which can help us explore, grow, and learn. And when we understand the purpose of these challenges and access the abundance of tools and support available to us, we can dwell in peace and gratitude, even as we confront inner and outer tumult. That may sound far-fetched, I know. If you're trapped in a small, dim corner of consciousness right now, it may be very hard to imagine the light and connection that are available to you. Or perhaps you've sometimes glimpsed that expanded perspective and then lost touch with it again. The pain of feeling lost, found, and then lost again is a human experience so common, so archetypal, that it may even be a necessary part of our developmental arc. Nonetheless, as we grow in awareness, we can get less lost, less of the time, and emerge more fully and more frequently into clarity and light. So, whoever you are, and wherever you are on your evolutionary journey, I hope you'll keep reading. It's fine if you feel doubtful or skeptical. Wherever you are, I've been there too. And I'm quite certain that somewhere, sometime, some part of you has also experienced the much more radiant inner landscape I'm describing. How can I be so sure? Because we're separate on one level of reality, but we're also not separate at all. Here's a story, one of many I could tell, about a time when I felt caught in one such dim corner of my own psyche. Years ago, before I had consciously embarked on any sort of healing or spiritual journey, I took a cross-country trip with Jim, my boyfriend of a few months. I was madly in love with Jim and felt thrilled at the thought of all those days in the cars together. Our first few days were sweet and intimate. Then halfway across country, we spent Thanksgiving with Jim's family. When we got back on the road, Jim was moody, withdrawn, and silent. And his silence and energetic absence precipitated truly awful feelings in me, feelings I had no idea what to do with. Intellectually, I recognized that Jim's silence most likely had nothing to do with me. The witnessing part of me couldn't understand why I felt so devastated. Yet the feelings wouldn't shift, and my efforts to draw him out only pushed him further away. The worse I felt, the more he distanced himself. I grew panicky, and my need for contact and reassurance felt truly desperate. With a bit of time alone, I might have regained my equilibrium. Spending time in nature, walking, and journaling were tools I had already used to help me through hard times. When all else failed, I had also used Valium or alcohol to numb difficult feelings. But now I couldn't do any of that. Instead, I was trapped with Jim in the small place of a car with days of driving still ahead of us. Having no other escape, my devastation began to shift to anger. Why couldn't Jim just make eye contact, hug me, and connect with me for even a few minutes? What would be so hard about that? My desires were perfectly reasonable, I told myself, and him. Naturally, this caused him to pull even further into himself. As we drove on, with the silence between us growing increasingly embittered and hostile, I wanted to be anywhere in the world but in that car. Sitting beside someone so unreachable made me feel as if I shouldn't exist. The next few days passed largely in painful silence, interrupted only by the times when I tried to connect with Jim and he pushed me away. The worst moment was when I tried to kiss him and he turned his face from me. I can't, he said. I didn't understand what he meant. What had happened to our love? When I look back now on those two young people, trapped not only in a car, but in an emotional dynamic they couldn't understand or work through, my heart aches for both of them. At the same time, I see that that experience was part of what spurred my quest for consciousness and healing. I knew that something felt very, very wrong, though at the same time, I had no idea what it was. Clearly, my pain was caused by a feeling of disconnection. But during that trip, I believed that the problem was my disconnection from Jim. I saw him as the one causing my distress and believed he was the only one who could alleviate it. I didn't understand the wounds playing themselves out between us or within me. I had no idea how to compassionately connect with the part of me that felt so terrified and alone. I had never heard of the healing technique shamans call soul retrieval, which could restore my sense of wholeness and helped me feel intact, no matter what happened with Jim or with anyone else. I didn't know that it was possible to energetically release damaging beliefs, like the belief that I shouldn't exist, from my body and my psyche. I also didn't realize that if I took responsibility for my own wounds and began to heal them, I would be able to form relationships with people with similar levels of self-responsibility and healing, making possible an entirely different level of intimacy. In short, I had no idea that the lasting solution to my pain had nothing to do with anyone else's actions or inactions. The locus of power lay within me. Whoa. The young woman in that car didn't know how to take responsibility for her own emotions. She didn't understand that the man beside her was merely triggering pain that had lodged in her for a very long time. Or that, even beyond her specific history, the real source of pain was her experience of individuated consciousness. She had no idea then how to connect with the compassionate forces larger than her small, wounded human self, forces that could help her heal that small self, while also giving her a much broader, deeper understanding of human existence. And because she didn't know these things, she caused herself a great deal of pain and also deeply hurt the people who tried to love her and those she tried to love. It took me years and a lot of false starts to find my way through these and other painful thickets. My hope is that this book will help speed up that process for you. After I wrote those words, I left the rental cabin where I'd been staying for the week and took a long walk on a country road at dusk. A flock of wild turkeys flared up in front of me, and I stopped to enjoy the small wind their wings had made. Frogs were singing their frog songs from the ditches in every direction. Such small beings, such loud voices. I love hearing so many of them, but seeing so few. I spied a patch of blooming narcissus. I didn't know that was a flower. I spied a patch of blooming narcissus across the road, walked over to it and squatted down to smell its fragrant blossoms. Then I picked one flower to carry with me. Someone must have planted these bulbs long ago, or perhaps they spread out on their own from a patch planted somewhere else. Life has a way of doing that. Quail startled me as I walked. Trees leaned over me, rustling. When I reached the pond, I noticed that a bufflehead duck had arrived to keep me company with the American coot already in residence. My host told me that the coot had been alone for weeks, so I was glad he would be alone no longer. I don't know if those two types of water birds share a common language, but at least to my human eyes, they looked at home together, paddling around the pond. The world is still alive all around us and within us, still vibrant, blooming, and beautiful in spite of all the terrible damage we have suffered and caused. And each of us still has the capacity to sense and respond to this beauty and aliveness. In the words of psychologist James Hillman, soul is born in beauty and feeds on beauty and requires beauty for its life. We can draw from it strength and inspiration for the journey ahead. So that's the end of chapter 1. Wow. So the big thing here is we got to be connected, opening ourselves up to connection to the higher consciousness. Wow, that's pretty powerful. Pretty powerful. Thanks, y'all. Da-da.